Welcome everybody to the webinar from EPMLive on portfolio management. What's it all about? My name is Rich Murphy from EPMLive, and I'm joined today by Serena Frank, who's principal consultant with Diane Meiller and Associates. And as you'll find out, Serena is an expert in this field. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own background and the EPMLive background. EPMLive is a Microsoft Gold Certified Partner since 2000. We are members of Microsoft's Partner Advisory Council for the Enterprise Project Management Solution, and have also been a technical advisor on all of the implementations of Project and Project Server since Project 2002. We have over 1,000 customers in 35 different countries in lots of different industries, from pharmaceutical, IT, engineering, construction, and we've been recognized by Inc. 500, Microsoft as their EPM Partner of the Year for 4 years. And we have over 150 partners in 50 countries. My own experience, by the way, I have 35 years experience in the project management field, beginning in the nuclear power industry, and have acted as both a consultant and software systems designer for project management systems. And in August of 2000, I became the solution CEO of Microsoft's EPM solution. And Serena also has a very impressive background. So today's agenda, we're going to cover what portfolio management is and why it's important, what governance is and how does it relate to portfolio management. Serena will be covering what some of the maturity stages of portfolio management are, and also giving a roadmap for establishing a successful project management and portfolio management discipline. And then I'll finish up with some tips for successfully implementing portfolio management in your organization. Before I turn it over to Serena, one thing we did both want to emphasize is that because for most organizations, especially IT organizations, the majority of the work in the organization is the stuff that keeps the lights on, operations support, the help desk, etc. We're firm believers in the fact that you have to consider all the effort in the organization to be successful with portfolio management, not just major projects. And Serena, now I'm going to turn it over to you.
Serena, are you there?
Oh, sorry about that. Hi, I'm Serena Frank. I'm with Diane and Associates, and we are a managing consulting firm specializing in 360-degree performance excellence, which is our methodology for helping organizations improve their performance. We start with strategic alignment and ensure that the strategy is articulated and that the people in the organization are aligned with that strategy. We often use change leadership and organizational development to achieve that, and almost always some kind of process optimization. And then we generally finish with a metrics-based management approach for continuous improvement. Our consultants are formerly with Fortune 500 companies. Myself, I have about 26 years of experience with companies such as IBM, Walt Disney World, and Wyndham Vacation Ownership. And I've been both a leader within the organizations as well as consultants to a lot of organizations, all different sizes and types. As a firm, we have expertise in IT governance, project management office, project management, business analysis, Six Sigma, balanced scorecard, change leadership, human resources, and many other fields. Personally, I have certifications in project management, governance, Six Sigma, and balanced scorecard. As an organization, we perform assessments usually to begin with, and then ensure the alignment with our functional technology and resources across the organizations. So next slide. not changing slides. Technical challenges. Okay. There we go. So first we'll talk about why PMO initiatives are successful, because unfortunately 50% or more fail. And we are often brought in when a PMO has either not done well or is at risk of failing or has failed. And what we have found across all the organizations we work with, the ones that are successful have executive sponsorship. It has to come from the top. It just does not work to have a bottoms-up project management office. We often see that within an organization, they think if we can get a smart person who's worked really hard and we really rely on them, they can be the PMO expert. And the fact is that there's a unique set of experiences and skills needed to initiate a PMO. And so we often advise that you should bring on some kind of an expert consultant to at least get started and avoid pitfalls. Every PMO is different, so it's important to understand what is expected of the PMO and design organizational appropriate vision, mission, and objectives. Next, adequate resources. It's critical. A lot of times they pick one person and say, well, you can do it all, and that usually is not the case. And then finally, another critical success factor that is often overlooked is change management. You think, well, we're just going to establish the PMO and make it work. And it has to be careful attention paid to communication and gaining the buy-in for the PMO. Because a PMO is often asking people to do new or different work. And there has to be an understanding of why is that important? Why does executive leadership want you to do that? And that helps with the success of the PMO effort. The next slide, we'll talk about the flip side and why they fail. And some of this is similar to what we just saw, but a little different perspective. So lack of executive support. If an organization doesn't really have governance yet, sometimes the PMO, it's a chicken and egg kind of thing. You need the PMO to support governance, but you need some kind of leadership and governance to make it successful. Another issue is sometimes an organizational barrier. I'm sure some of you have experienced this, where there's incentives built into the operating structure that lead business unit leaders to compete for resources rather than optimize. So most business unit leaders are incented to make their area successful and not care as much about whether the other area is successful. And this makes it challenging to get people to work together and agree upon prioritization. Lack of clear objectives. We often find that a strategy is not really clearly articulated, and if it's not, very hard to say, well, what is most important if you don't have the overall strategy. Lack of IT awareness. This is very common if the business doesn't really understand technology or how to manage it. And finally, kind of a reactionary mindset that a lot of organizations are very operational. I worked for one that just day to day, it was very sales oriented, and they didn't spend a whole lot of time planning and strategizing. Basically, they just wanted to make the sale that day. And so there wasn't this kind of planning and governance aspect until we introduced it and explained why it was so important. Next slide. Okay, so most people have heard of the maturity model by now, and this is not exactly the CMMI maturity model, but it's close. And it's a tool that we've used quite often within organizations or with clients. It's helpful in explaining in business terms what different levels of maturity might be. And when we show this, think about where your organization is and where you might like it to be. So it starts off on the level 1 and 2 is kind of reactive. You're growing your skills, growing your ability to have predictable results, but still reacting to what's needed at the time. And in level 3, you become more proactive and responsive to what the organization needs. And then levels 4 and 5 is a much higher level, and we call it predictive. Now, important to understand that not every organization needs to get to a level 4 or 5, that often a level 3 is just fine because the investment in time and money to get to a 4 and 5 is just prohibitive and not justified. So be careful when you look at this and don't assume that you need to get to a 4 or 5. 3 may be just fine. And the business may see a huge difference at that level and really appreciate it. Then we move into governance. This is from COVID, which is put out by ISACA. And these are the 4 questions that are asked within governance. Governance addresses the allocation of resources and the management of risk. So the first question is, are we doing the right things? Are we focused on what the organization values most? Doing the work that's going to help us achieve the strategic objectives that we need. Then are we getting those benefits? So when we do this work and we deliver these projects, have we actually checked to make sure that the benefits were achieved? Next, are we getting them done well? So are we using an organized process that's repeatable to get them done in an efficient manner, or are we wasting resources? We might be getting them done, but maybe not as efficiently as possible. So that's part of governance. And then lastly, are we doing them the right way? This is a little bit more subtle. And this speaks to, are we delivering projects or systems or work in a way that they're sustainable and supportable? So think about architecture. If you deliver functionality within a technology set that is already supported by the business, by the IT organization and the business, it's much easier and more efficient and cost-effective. Whereas if you are always implementing one-off types of systems, your support structure will grow and won't be sustainable. So the right way is making sure you're doing it with an eye towards the long-term plan. Next. So there are a lot of processes that are used within governance to achieve these results. And the first one, which we're going to talk about in much more depth in a little while, is IT portfolio management. And by portfolio, we mean the portfolio of projects, both proposed or pipeline and active projects that are underway. Within portfolio management, there's a lot of focus on prioritization and scheduling of the projects and resource management. These are both fairly heavy process-oriented functions that are critical to the organization. Other processes that governance utilizes is cost transparency. This helps leaders in the organization understand where people are spending their time, their money, and if the benefits are actually being achieved. Next, risk management. We talked about governance being focused on risk. It's important that the risks are being identified across the board, across projects at all different levels, organizational risks, external risks, project risks, and then mitigated. So it's not enough to just identify potential risk, but they also need to be mitigated. And then next, demand management. Demand management can be challenging because it's about capturing what the organization needs, what are their demands. And this is done through relationship management and a pre-project analysis. It can be challenging to identify all the needs of the business, and it's kind of an ongoing, multiple changes involved throughout a planning period in that area. And then the one that people are most familiar with, program and project management disciplines, that utilizes project management methodology, SDLC, and you have to have the right skills, and the governance key piece is the toll gates. So going through kind of gates to make sure that you're managing risk, following process, and on track to achieve the results. Finally, communication. And this one's often overlooked because it seems like it's a given, but when a governance organization makes decisions, those have to be communicated out so that everybody understands what the decisions are and what the priorities are going to be. And across all of this is communication, collaboration, and coordination throughout the functions of governance. Next. So the pyramid. So I often show this slide to help people get grounded in how governance is used. At its foundation is people, process, and technology. And the bottom box is about project management. And the governance there is to make sure that consistent, repeatable processes are being used for project management. And then as we move up a level into program management, this is addressing and managing the dependencies between connected or like projects that fall under a program. And there's a level of governance there, scheduling resources, scheduling time, and managing those dependencies between projects. And then finally, we're back to portfolio management, which is that alignment with objectives, making the right investments based on prioritization and decisions. And we're going to get a lot more into that. But governance cuts across all of these areas. You can see elements of governance in all three boxes. And that's the important part. Next slide. So I included a typical governance model, which is three-tier. At the bottom level is the project delivery committees. And this usually includes the project manager, the sponsor, and some key stakeholders. And it's primarily concerned with executing the project, getting it done on time, on budget. And they should manage the weekly activities, making scope, change decisions, things that are managed within the original budget and schedule of the project. If things go beyond that original plan, then it often gets bumped up to the IT Portfolio Management Steering Committee. The steering committee is generally staffed with operational leaders who care deeply about IT because it impacts their part of the business. And they are tasked with prioritizing work so that the most important work receives the resources in time that they need them. They make recommendations that are then fed up to the IT Governance Council level. The council level actually is the decision-making body that authorizes work. And that one is usually staffed with a few key top-level executives within the organization. Often the CFO, CIO, maybe a COO, or another leader of a key function if it's a heavily sales-oriented organization maybe, or it's a heavily engineering organization, maybe the head of that group. And the Governance Council is the one that authorizes, makes the decision, but they often push a project down. There's a strategic effort that they see needs to be done, and they'll say, well, this has to get on the list. And so they can also initiate projects. Next slide. So I put together a few questions. I know it's difficult to ask questions in this format sometimes. And these are questions that I get asked all the time. So I thought I would put them out there and answer them. And using a typical consultant answer, it depends, but I'll give you some examples. So I often get asked, what should we do first, project management or governance? And the answer, of course, is it depends. I can tell you that it could put the PMO at risk of failure if you do governance first without any project management processes in place. So governance is going to set up some expectations that important work is going to get delivered. And if you can't deliver upon that, that is a huge risk. On the other hand, if you do have basic project management processes in place and just need some governance in terms of direction and prioritization, that might be the right place to start. One organization I worked with, they had a lot of small efforts going on, but they all added up to fairly low value. And they needed governance to start because they wanted governance to come up with what are those valuable efforts and projects that they could be done. So the governance was formed, and they were able to come up with some valuable things that then could be executed by project management. So those are some guidelines. Next, I always get asked, well, who should be on the various governance boards? And I tried to give you some of that information as we went through them. Did I miss this slide? No. Can you go back one? Thank you. So the top level are usually some representatives of the Executive Steering Committee. And it's not the whole Executive Steering Committee, but the key members that would be involved in IT steering and IT decisions. The next one, the Steering Committee, are usually the key operational leaders under those people that are on the Executive Council. And then the third one is the PM, the sponsors, the stakeholders. The people on the governance board should be engaged they never have enough time to do all their work. That's generally typical. But they have to make the time and realize the value that they're providing. And then finally, the other question I get asked is, do we really need 3 levels of governance? And my guidance there is if it's a smaller organization, maybe less than 1,000 people, we have seen and recommended that they only have 2 levels because the senior level team is very hands-on. But if you get over that and the senior level team isn't interested or able to actually go through that effort to prioritize the projects, that's when you need that middle level. So that's my guidance on that. So next, we'll move on to portfolio management. And Rich, if you just want to hit the button again, it will do the circle. So this is a personal chart that I've come up with that shows maturity stages in portfolio management. It's a practical. This is not a CMMI chart. But the stage 1 that I see, it's often very politically driven, meaning people who are most influential get what they want versus necessarily the people that should be getting, or the parts of the organization that should get the resources. Very ad hoc and driven by maybe firefighting, reaction to a problem. They say, oh, we need to do this system. And then often the planning is limited to the budgeting process. So people don't have a lot of forethought about what projects they need until they have to go through the budget. Stage 2 gets a little bit more business needs driven. So there's some anticipation as to what is going to be needed in the next period. There might be some scoring involved where they actually look at the projects and rank them. At this stage, often financial justification is introduced and an authorization board saying, okay, you can do this. The next stage, stage 3, is even more proactive, and there's selection criteria and categorization set up ahead of time. Say these are the kinds of projects we're looking for. And then this one, the projects killed for risk, and Rich, if you could hit the button, it's going to circle that one. But this is kind of the bellwether that when an organization can kill a project midstream, maybe after requirements, they realize, you know, this is going to cost too much, this isn't exactly what we need anymore, and if they can kill the project without killing the people, then that is a true sign of maturity. And then at this stage, there's a view of the projects within that portfolio, and there's an oversight as a project portfolio. And then finally, in a stage 4, we see that there's even more proactiveness in that organizations are actually planning out for the next 12 to 18 months. What are those business capabilities that we're going to need? And putting them on the roadmap so that the steering committee can see way ahead of time what projects they're going to be asked to approve. They may look at that portfolio and balance it across drivers or strategies or business areas and really take some time to proactively do analysis and assessment. And finally, there's very clear communicated return on investment after projects have implemented of what benefits were achieved. So this is just a very practical roadmap of things that we've seen. Now, if you look at your organization, you could see maybe you have some in stage 1, some in stage 2, and some in stage 3. It doesn't have to be only in one stage. And the red circle that's kind of the bellwether, you can pat yourselves on the back if you've actually had projects killed for risk and the people weren't killed along with them. So that's a good sign of maturity. All right, next. So project selection, and we talked about categorizations and filters. The first wide angle of this filter, this funnel, would be, is something mandatory or regulatory? Is it strategically aligned? Are there measurable benefits? And is it technically feasible? And if it passes those filters, then it can go down to a little bit narrower part of the funnel. And then you might look at how is it categorized by the business driver? What is it going to do for the organization? Is it going to help the business run better? Is it going to help it grow? Is it going to help it actually transform? And what's the size? So you start getting some metrics about these projects. And then finally, as it gets narrow to the narrow end of the cone, then it gets scored. And I'll show you a sample scoring tool in a while. Next. So this is an example of how you might categorize projects by driver. We've used this in a couple of organizations where they look at the projects, whether it's legislative or compliance or maybe a mandatory project. And these are primary drivers. So often projects will support several of these, but you have to look at what is its primary driver. Is this customer satisfaction? Are you helping your customers? Or is it an internal productivity or cost savings project? We see a lot more reporting and business intelligence driven projects these days. And then finally, infrastructure. So why is this project important to the organization? That's the driver. Next. So this is a sample project scoring that I promised. And I know this looks like a lot. It's kind of a lot of colors. So I'm going to just direct your attention to the black box. And the point here is that your project score should always include a value score and a risk score. And often it's helpful to net those against each other. Because you could have a project that has a tremendous amount of value, but if it isn't feasible, then you'd be wasting the money that you've invested in. So it's always good to net value and risk. In this example, value is divided into business drivers, business criteria, IT criteria, and financial criteria, which is fairly typical. And the risk criteria is divided into technology risk and business risk, and that's fairly typical as well. And then there's a weight for each one of those criteria, a score assigned. What you don't see here is a rubric to guide people in how to score them, and then you come up with the net scores, and you can rank the projects. Next. So once again, I've come up with a few questions, and I'll give you some answers for these. So who scores the projects? I get asked that all the time. And the recommendation there is who knows the most about the project. This is generally in a very early stage. Not a lot of analysis has been done. The sponsor should definitely be involved, and often a project manager. If a project manager is not assigned yet, it might be the business analyst or anybody who's helped to define this project and how it might be developed. And then what criteria should we use? Well, we gave some examples in the scoring tool. Criteria usually consists of what's important to the organization, whether it's specific strategies, whether it's financial, customer, employee information, or if it's going to help the employees, but always include risk. So there's a variety of criteria, but it has to be customized for each organization and what they value. The next one is, how should we analyze the portfolio? Well, that depends on who you're analyzing it for and for what purpose. So if you're looking at governance, then you might look at some charts by driver, like we showed you the pie chart, maybe by strategy. You might be looking at the investment by business area, or you could have some interesting charts of cost versus value, or time versus investment, or there's a lot of things you can organize the data for governance to help them make smart decisions. And then part of the portfolio would be your active projects. And here you would want information on cost, schedule, and risks, and then sort that by maybe what are the highest risks. If you're using a stoplight, show all the reds. You might look at what are the projects that are soonest to be implemented. Another way of analyzing the portfolio is according to resource needs, looking at both or either active and pipeline as to what types of resources are needed. Next chart, the next topic, what reports are needed. This is something I know Rich deals with quite a bit. A lot of organizations produce maybe even too many reports because there's so many possibilities. But certainly at a minimum, for governance, you want to see the pipeline or proposed projects. You want to understand the resource needs versus availability for those proposed projects. For active projects, you want to understand the status in terms of schedule, budget, risk. And another one that is maybe above and beyond to include, but is great, is retrospective. Look at the results that you've achieved from these projects. So you authorized them through governance, you executed them, and you expected some results, so what was actually achieved? And use those retrospective to continually improve your project delivery, your governance, and portfolio management processes. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Rich. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Serena. Just like to remind everybody, I did say she was an expert with lots of experience. So a question is, having seen the background that Serena provided, and assuming your organization wants to implement portfolio management successfully, how do you get there? So what I'm going to be covering to wrap up the presentation is some of the critical success factors that EPMLive consultants and myself have seen with successful implementations, and some of the things that cause implementations to fail. And then I'm going to cover 5 specific tips on creating an inventory and why it's important, implementing a stage gate process, why it's important to evaluate priorities and recognize that you're in a changing environment, almost certainly, why resource management is important, and some tips and tricks on reporting and dashboards. So based on the many hundreds of implementations that we've done over the years, these are what I believe are the critical success factors to a successful implementation of portfolio management for any organization. The first is management commitment. Serena mentioned earlier that this is not a bottoms-up process. Portfolio management doesn't get implemented successfully by people in the trenches and the detail project managers saying they want it to happen. You need serious management commitment from the senior management team. And perhaps the most important criteria and most important factor is participation by them. That participation doesn't have to be major, by the way. My own belief from many implementations that I've seen succeed and ones that have had issues and problems are that if you can get the senior managers who know what they want from a system and know what they want from the project and portfolio management process, if you can get them involved in the beginnings of the requirements gathering process, perhaps just one day or 2 half-hour sessions where they can say, here's what we're trying to do, here are the systems we have in place, here's what we like about them, what we don't like about them, here's what systems we have to interface with, and here's the type of visibility that we would like to see. That is the key. I've seen people implement systems very quickly when those people are involved, and I've seen people spend months and months unsuccessfully because those people weren't involved and later got involved down the road and said, the system's not giving me what I want, because they never stood up and said what they wanted. So getting management participation early on is a real key. Another key success factor is setting a reasonable implementation schedule. You do not implement a portfolio management system and a process overnight. It doesn't happen over a weekend. We tell people 4 to 6 weeks to get to a full production system is a reasonable time frame. That includes training for your staff so people are comfortable with the system and see that it's getting and giving them what they want. People are not going to contribute to the system if they don't see that they're getting some benefit from it. We always recommend starting with a pilot group, especially if you're implementing things like governance and you're implementing weighted values and strategic scorecards, for example. You want to start with a small group so that people understand what the system is capable of producing and can give some feedback, and you can refine the configuration based on their experience. Another point I always make to people is that 6 months down the road from when you've put a system into full production, if you haven't made changes to your stage gate process, if you haven't made changes to your governance, if you haven't made changes to the reports and dashboards that you're getting, you're not really using the system. So the first tip of the 5 is start with a simple inventory of all the efforts in the organization. Don't assume that you have a complete list, because management has some lists that they use. Very often when I get involved in implementations, I go and collect the lists that managers in the organization are using, and I'm always amazed to find 2 things. One, the differences between the lists that the managers have, projects that the other managers don't know about, and also when you go and talk to the people who are working on the efforts and working on the projects, how much time they're spending on things that aren't on anybody's list. And just getting a simple list, is important. Gather some simple and common information about every effort, whether it's a major project, a new initiative in the pipeline, or something that is supporting operations and keeping the lights on. Something simple like, when was it planned to start and finish? An overall manpower budget and perhaps costs, which should always be time-phased, by the way. We strongly believe that you have to have your costs and your manpower in a time-phased fashion, whether it's months, fiscal months, quarters, etc., so that you don't run into the situation of finding out you're overexpended when you finally are. Time-phased budgets and manpower forecasts permit you to see where you're headed. For each effort, gather some of the major business goals it supports, identify who's in charge of each effort, and also, at the same time, don't create so much data on every single effort that it encourages senior management to micromanage everything. That's something you don't want. So I'm going to give you an example of how something as simple as an inventory can help. This is something that actually happened at an organization about 5 or 6 years ago. This was a large organization with $750 million in annual revenues, 5,000 employees, and a staff of 150 in their IT organization. The IT group had pretty much been successful over the years, but because of the economic downturn, they were struggling to reduce costs. The organization itself had sort of a silo culture where one group threw the project over the wall to the other department, okay, without any real interaction and without any decision-making and meetings on, are we doing the right things? The CEO of this organization, in an effort to do something about the situation, hired a new CIO and said, I want you to turn things around. So here's what the new CIO did. He called in all his senior staff and said, we're going to have a six-week review of everything that we're currently doing. There were 200 projects on the original list. There wasn't much data for each of those efforts. Some projects were using Microsoft Projects, some projects were using Excel, some projects were using Word to capture their progress and forecast. A lot of projects had no plans at all, and even the managers who were using the list of projects had very little confidence in it. So the CIO told the senior staff, I want you to recommend a standard set of measures and a planning approach for everything we do. And he wants recommendations for retaining, consolidating, or killing off projects. And then he also wants an assessment and some recommendations on where do the managers think we are in terms of organizational, project, and portfolio management maturity. And here's the result. Okay, of the 200 projects, more than 1/3 of them were killed or absorbed into other efforts. Okay, and this pie chart basically shows what happened. Okay, between ones that were killed and absorbed, there were essentially 70 projects that were either found to be redundant, conflicting, irrelevant, or out of control. If you go back to Serena's slide on portfolio management maturity, her stage 3, it basically the one requirement that she circled was the ability of the organization to kill a project that in essence was unnecessary or not going to produce the results it was charted to when it began. Another recommendation we make to all of our customers is to implement some sort of stage gate control process. So what do we mean by stage gates? Stage gates are not phases of a project, okay? They're actually the stages in the review and approval process for all major efforts. So in essence, everything starts out as proposed, okay? And then passes through various stage gates, each of which has some business rules on what data is required, what data must be entered, what data can't be changed, for example. I like to tell the story of when I was with Microsoft, their CTO had a rule that if a project involved more than 10,000 man-hours, the commitment date to the user organization could not change without his approval. So basically, he didn't allow anybody to change that without him knowing about it. And what's very important is that the IT governance board that Serena described and the various steering committees, they should be involved in certain stage gate reviews, not necessarily everyone, and they should be involved in them on a published criteria basis. So everybody should be aware that when we reach this stage, this information is required and the IT governance board is going to be seeing it. This is just one simple example of a type of stage gate process, beginning with proposed. At some point, an effort or some idea goes into an estimating stage, goes to the governance board for review. They could decide to put it on hold. It could be put on hold at other stages also. And then it might be authorized, or it might be authorized with some special conditions. And finally, it gets to be closed out. The important thing is that in this stage gate process here, it isn't until you get to the execution stage gate that the phases of the project, in project management terms, actually come into play. This is just an example of how our tool, Portfolio Engine, allows you to control and enforce that process. The various tabs you see here for general, info, plan, assessment, and track. Depending on the stage gate that you are at, those tabs appear or don't appear, and the rules for what data has to be filled out or can't be filled out and what data is even visible are enforced through that process. Another thing that is important to consider for most organizations we run into is the costs of all the efforts, whether it's the operational and support efforts, the help desk, or major projects. We suggest that you identify the key types of costs that you are going to measure. In this case, I'm using an example that's showing the actual cost, the budget for projects that are major in Microsoft Project, the work effort, the man hours that are being expended. Another type of cost is the non-labor actual costs. And then you have things like resource plans, timesheet actuals, total costs, and work done with other types of planning tools. Another way to break down cost is breaking costs down by labor. In this case, we're breaking labor down by business analysts, DBAs, developers, etc. And then we have some other costs that are non-labor, material contracts, and other. I also point out we've run into many customers lately who want to break their costs down by capital expense categories because they're going to financially handle the capital projects in a slightly different way. It's important that you align your cost categories to the way that you actually do business, and you should count on your portfolio system to be able to track the costs the way you want those reported. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about reporting, views, and dashboards. Some tips and hints here, especially for senior management, you want to consider the use of exception-based reporting. Senior managers should not be looking at 2,000 lines of data on major projects. They should be focusing on things that are out of budget, things that are behind schedule, things that are that have major risks associated with them. So it is important to orient the reports to the various management levels, and it's also very important to rely on graphical views whenever possible. Graphs can present in one page or one view information that might take 20 pages of detail, and you want reports and graphical views that enable people to drill down. Another small tip that I give to people when we implement a system is to limit the number of reports or views that any person normally receives or has access to. And that's especially true for senior management. You don't want senior management to be down worrying about what a specific resource is doing on a specific task on a project, especially if that project is running along fine. So here's an example of a financial dashboard, which is breaking down the portfolio of work by the type of project, whether it's development or program related, also a pie chart, and basically showing actual versus budget. And at the bottom of the screen there, you're seeing a web part that's actually breaking projects down by whether they're active, and when they are active, whether they're either development or program, and showing the budget and actual costs and a graphical indicator for their status. Here's another cost type of view. This is showing the various stage gates, so this is showing the proposed pipeline projects followed by the active projects. And again, they're broken down by whether they're development, enhancement, marketing, support, etc. So in summary, project and portfolio management are both needed in an organization. And IT governance requires both of them, and it requires solid processes to support them. We recommend that you start off just trying to produce a reasonable inventory of all the work that's going on in the organization, because if you don't do that, you're going to have a very hard time advancing to something as sophisticated as resource management. Develop a process and implement a stage gate process to initiate and review new ideas. As Serena pointed out, you want to consider what levels of governance and governance committees and boards you want to have. Take the time to evaluate your reporting needs, and expect that people should be giving you feedback on what reports are useful to them, what reports need some changes, what reports are not producing anything for them. And that's something that's going to continually be modified over time. And then finally, because all of this is based for the major projects, at least on project management, you do want to continue to advance the project management skills, of your organization. With that, I'm going to wrap up. Serena's email and my email are here. If you have questions, we'd be glad to answer them. And I'd also recommend that you watch for our next webinar, which is going to be on transforming IT from a cost center, to a value center. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Serena if you have any final comments, Serena.
No, thank you very much, Rich. That was great.